I know, it's been too long since the last video. You know, sometimes you go on an unexpected journey, sometimes you go on a very expected one to Bonnaroo, have a great time, get very sunburned, and somehow it manages to screw up your schedule for an entire month. But I've returned now to the Shire, so let's get down to it. Hi, I'm Jay, and I don't trust men who don't wear shoes. When I was a kid, high fantasy wasn't really my thing. Not enough robots, not enough bright colors. Where's Pikachu? Why isn't my friend Pikachu here? And so I forewent the Lord of the Rings movies for a long time. I've seen them since, don't get me wrong, and I think they're fine, even if I went in favor of more culturally nuanced fare. I went so far as to try reading the books too, and oh boy did I fall off of those quicker than this guy who's on fire in the third one. No. The Hobbit, on the other hand. The Hobbit slaps! I liked The Hobbit a lot growing up. It was exactly the right length, not bogged down with the grand scale map of things to keep track of. It gave you the impression that it was part of a bigger world without trying to force the scale of that world into the size of its plot. Lots of things are bad at this. Let's think about the Marvel movies. They're sort of the equivalent touchstone of the now, after all. Sure, it's great and fine to have a big fun superhero movie where the world is at stake under the threat of a big blue laser, but if every single movie is on that scale, eventually the scale stops meaning as much. It loses impact. Then something like Spider-Man Homecoming comes along with a plot that only threatens a smaller group of people and has a lower level of risk. And it actually has more tangible impact because when the scale is smaller, you're able to see the details of it that much more. So in Lord of the Rings, all of Middle-earth hangs in the balance, but I always liked The Hobbit more because it was really just as big as the Lonely Mountain and the road to it, or at least that's how it should be. Peter Jackson looked at that and kind of just went, let's add Legolas and a wizard fight and a tree hobo. But before Peter Jackson decided he hadn't had enough of his CGI spiders and no men who hate shoes, before Sir Ian McKellen sighed and prepared to don the dirty dish rags of Gandalf the Grey one more time, there was another adaptation, one that maybe understood the scope of The Hobbit as a story a little bit better. And no, I'm not talking about the animated movie. Welcome to The Longest Licensed Voyage.
This is the tale of Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit with no idea of the adventures about to befall him, or their consequences.
The Hobbit was published in 2003 by Sierra Entertainment, a venerable name you might recognize as the one behind the King's Quest games, and I think Police Quest, and probably some other games with Quest in the title. It seems like their thing. It was developed by Inevitable Entertainment, which would be bought by Midway a year later and rebranded as Midway Austin, only to have its ornate elven doors closed a few years after that. So really, as the game opens with Gandalf appearing at Bilbo Baggins' Hobbit hutch, inviting him on a grand quest, so too did Sierra come to Inevitable, pulling the studio into a grand journey that would ultimately end in an uneventful trip back home and very little discussion of the great and cool thing they once did. Just like what the Hobbit man do. So Gangrene comes to Bill Borscht with a proposal. The dwarves, who have invaded Bimbo's home without even wiping their feet on the goddamn carpet, want to get back their home inside the very far away Lonely Mountain, and part of the job requires the aid of a burglar to help steal some particular stuff from a big angry boy named Smog. About half the story is just the journey to the Lonely Mountain and nearby Lake Town, and the game makes very full use of this, with a little help from the Middle-earth Tourism Board. Are you looking for an adventure? Come discover beautiful Middle-earth. Hike and climb across our scenic, troll-infested trails. Explore our national parks, full of diverse wildlife such as venomous spiders, different venomous spiders, and a lot of venomous spiders. Enjoy the rich cultures of our elven kingdom, where you'll get complimentary imprisonment and a free barrel ride upon exit, all part of true, authentic elven hospitality. Make your special someone feel as unique as the One Ring with a gift from the expansive vaults of Lonely Mountain. Don't stay invisible through these deals. Call today at 1-800-555-WARG for a free couples package to the Lake Town Bed and Breakfast. Free kayak lessons are on Five Armies Fridays, but remember, they can be a real battle. Most of the game's early chapters involve the party getting stopped in the rain or looking to find a place to make camp, and Burgess getting set off to find food or shelter while everyone else stands around and stares into space. Nice of them to help. There's one level that starts with Belch's Bagman meeting Gollum, known from the movies as the Andy Serkis portrayed Ratman who everyone did impressions of at parties for a few years. Here he winds up handing over the ever so important One Ring after being beaten by Bulbous in a game of Riddle Me Piss! The ring makes you go invisible, you use that for some stealth stuff, alright, cool, that's fine. But I want to go back to something here. take a look at this game's Gollum. Now, take a look at movie Gollum. They're both pretty similar, drawing off the description of the little wrinkly scrote boy from the books, but even with the special effects of the time when the movies first came out, movie Gollum looks a little more human than his video game counterpart, and this got me thinking. Take a look at any characters in the Lord of the Rings or Hobbit movies, and you'll see a lot of really good practical and special effects. The original trilogy had a $93 million budget, so I'm sure a good few pennies went into making sure Orlando Bloom's hair was just right. And yeah, sure, it's certainly worth it to make sure Hugo Weaving looks like L. Ron Hubbard or whatever, but at the end of the day, you're still looking at people in makeup, some very recognizable people even. So I look at how these characters come to life in the movies. I look at the dwarves and all of their complicated braids and probable face STDs, and then I look at the job the game does. In the Hobbit game, each level is bookended by these storybook illustrations that fill in the beats from place to place. They're not visual masterworks by any stretch, but they do the thing that drawings and cartoons do, that it is much harder to do in real life. They stretch proportions and play with realism in order to make characters more well-defined. There's a rule when creating characters for a cartoon, or often for a video game, where you want each one to be recognizable by silhouette alone. The Hobbit game and a lot of other animated media involving fantasy races seems to work on the same or a similar principle. Bilbo and all the other hobbits you see have this almost chibi look with big round eyes and all. The dwarves are very stocky and small but broad, and the elves look like High and Snooty was born into their DNA. I'm not saying the movies don't also gun for this sort of distinction, they do, and they succeed a lot of the time, but I do think the game pulls it off in a way better. I buy these fantastical characters and their world better in the artistry of PS2 polygons than in short Martin Freeman becoming friends with tall Richard Armitage. There's a character named Bjorn who shows up later and is just a huge actual talking bear, what like the one from the Golden Compass, and in the movie he's this, and I don't know why it is that he is this. Why is it that he is this? The Hobbit is a long journey though, and even the best trip can be marred by a bad stay at a shifty Motel 6. I've alluded a couple times to this one level that's full of spiders, culminating in a boss fight where you have to deal with approximately this many of them in order to save your friends. They poison you, they move too quickly to hit, and they will in fact hump your corpse when you die, with wild abandon even. For those keeping score, we are now at 50% of the games we've covered in this series being marred by bad spider encounters. Why do we treat the humble arachnid in this way? Why do we insist on demonizing these 8-legged or sometimes 4-legged friends who want nothing more than to hang out in our basements and catch flies, which is in fact a public service and should be commended? Do we hate them for this? Are people afraid the spiders will unionize because they should unionize? Or maybe there's something deeper going on, something more primordial. Perhaps, back in the era of the caveman, we fought spiders far larger and more deadly than the little cabinet squatters we know today, and this is us representing something deeply bred into our history. Perhaps we are giving ourselves a subconscious warning for the day the large spiders will once again walk the earth. In this essay, I will... Alright, sorry. I promised my loved ones I wouldn't do that this time after Garfield Kart. Spiders aside, there are also some really excellent level designs in this thing. Bilbo's ring makes for some cool stealth segments, sneaking around the corridors of the elf's castle like you're the Solid Snake, and eventually you make it to Lake Town and spend a whole level being asked by this dad mayor type to look into some corrupt guy who owns a winery or something. But then things pick up when the gang makes it to the Lonely Mountain at long last. Now it's a friendly mountain. Then Bumbus makes his way down into the treasure room where Smaug likes to hang out and dream about the ending of Game of Thrones. This is probably my favorite bit of the game. The goal is to sneak bit by bit through this enormous chamber of coins that jangle a wake-up alarm when you step on them. It's a cool stealth sequence that results in waking the bastard up, getting him to screw off, and then doing a bit of spelunking in order to escape. Smudge is shot down by Lake Dad, who I guess realized there were bigger fish to fry than whatever was going on with the wine man, which is poor civic management when you really think about it. One funny thing that's come up a bunch, and continues to after this, is that they need to keep coming up with new reasons to ask Bidoof Boggishans to do things. At first it's, oh, bingo, you're the only one small enough to sneak around and find us food. Then it's, hey, Bludgeon, save us from imprisonment on like 4 different occasions. Then it's, hey, Bionicle, go see how that big shitty lizard is doing and see if he will leave. But now that the dwarves have their house back, all they give him is, hey, Bertrude, help us patch up our fence. Not every day a boy like you gets to whitewash a nice picket fence like this. To the movie's credit, they have a way better sense of building tension and climactic action than the game. In the final level, the Battle of Five Armies begins over the right to the Lonely Island, and Bagel Bunsen steals the special rock inside it and fucks off with it to try and make the fighting end. This does not work. So instead he just goes and hacks through a bunch of tall boys, meets Bjorn the bear dude, and goes off with him to see if any of the bad guys are filled with honey. They're not, which might make Bjorn sad, but it's great for Borscht Belt because they do find infinite EXP. The final battle happens because some wizards trap Bjorn in a dome, leaving you to play Mousetrap to free him. Those eagles people are mad about come and save the day, and the head dwarf dies after getting no character development. Kinda made me miss that scene from the last movie where it looks like he's wading through caramel or honey. Back, Bjorn, back! No, bad Bjorn! And that's it. The dwarves take back their home, Baron von Bacon heads back to his, a couple sacks of gold in his hand and a mystical ring in his pocket. I have to be honest here, this video has been a challenge to write, because it presented me with something we haven't really seen before in this series. The game is actually pretty good. So in an earlier draft of this video, I had a whole running joke planned where I'd found a bunch of conspiracies in the Hobbit game, but couldn't talk about them because the Illuminati was trying to silence me after the Garfield cart video. But at the end of the day, it felt really ill-fitting and disingenuous to this game. If you want a series where every game gets trash-talked and made the butt of 1,000 jokes in the same way, I can point you to the entire history of YouTube for examples, but that's not what this is. I don't really want to drag the Hobbit the way I dragged Garfield cart or Catwoman, because the reality is I really enjoyed playing The Hobbit. It's clear that the folks who made this thing cared a lot about turning the novel into a suitable video game adaptation. Do I think it's the best gem of its time or anything? No, of course not, but in writing about The Hobbit, I was reminded again that not every story is the same. If I tried to talk about every game the same way on the longest licensed voyage, I think over time the angle would stop meaning as much. It would lose impact. Do you see what I did there? I made it parallel to what I was saying about the MCU at the start of the video. It's the same kind of argument. You could say we really went there and back again, which is the alternate name for The Hobbit. Look, I don't know what you want, okay? The Hobbit is fine. Lord of the Rings is still boring. All these movie dwarves look like they're about to ambush me behind a Chinese restaurant and try to sell me crystals when all I want is my goddamn beef lo mein. I've been Jay. Don't trust large spiders. Video over. When do I get to play a game where I go to space? I like space better.